Hello everyone and welcome to today's session, Zero Trust Network, going beyond the traditional perimeter defense, by our speakers John Kinderweg, Jason Gabis and Amol Kodak. I, Shilpa Goswami and Richa Panber will be your host for the day. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to organizers or panelists, please post your query in the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio video challenges, please check your internet connection or you may log out and log in again. An important announcement for certificate of attendance. Participants need to attend the complete webinar to qualify for the certificate of attendance. Participants should fill in the survey form in the attendees thank you mail and answer the three questions based on the webinar provided with the right answers within the same day. If these two criteria are met, then only the participant will receive the certificate of attendance within 5 to 7 working days after the event. Now about our speakers. John Kinderweg, considered one of the world's leading cybersecurity experts. John Kinderweg is best known for creating the revolutionary zero trust model. He is graduated with a BA in communication from the University of Iowa and lives in Dallas, Texas. Since March 2021, he has been working at Onto IT as a Senior Vice President, Cybersecurity Strategy and Onto It Global Fellow. Previously, he has worked at Palo Alto Networks as Field CTO for 4 years and 8 and 1.5 years as a Vice President and Principal Analyst on the Security and Risk team at Forrester Research. As a practitioner, John has served as a security architect, penetration tester, and security consultant. He has been interviewed and published in several esteemed publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg, and the New York Times. Also, he has featured on television networks such as CNBC, Fox News, PBS, and Bloomberg in discussions revolving around information security. John has spoken at many security conferences and events, including RSA, SXSW, TourCon, InfoSec Europe, SMOCon, and InfoSec World. Now about our second speaker, Jason Gabis. Jason Gabis is a certified cybersecurity professional who has completed his bachelor's degree in computer science from Cornell University and earned a high technology MBA from Northeastern University. As the Chief Product Officer for AppGate, Jason oversees the company's security, product strategy, and product management. Also, he leads the research and publication initiatives as the co-chair of SDP Zero Trust Working Group at the Cloud Security Alliance. His 30 years of experience in product management, engineering, and consulting at security and technology firms, including RSA, was primarily concentrated on identity management and governance products. His extensive experience enabled him to author Zero Trust Security and Enterprise Guide. About our speaker who will be moderating the session, Amol Kodak. He is a senior engineering and technology leader with a record of leading and global R&D teams, developing innovative products and technology platforms, especially in the space of industrial IoT, vehicle, and aerospace. He has critical leadership experience in building and heading various products and technology verticals, center of excellence, and connected solutions, IoT, cloud, and security, cybersecurity. Amol currently works as engineering director R&D heading the cardiovascular portfolio at Medtronic Engineering and Innovation Center and is focused on building patient-centric connected care solutions. Now, without any further delay, I would now hand over the session to you, Amol.
All right. Thank you, Shilpa, and thank you, Richa. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our wonderful audience from around the globe. We have right now more than 120 participants today. I'm Amol Kodag, and as a panelist, I would be moderating the session on this very interesting and critical topic, zero trust network going beyond the traditional perimeter defense. So I'm looking forward for a very engaging discussion with my fellow panelists, John and Jason, and an interactive Q&A session with you all towards the end. All right, so let's set the context first, right? So the main concept behind zero trust is, in simple words, never trust, always verify, right? And which means that devices should not be trusted by default. And if they are connected to a managed corporate network, such as corporate LAN, and even if they were previously verified. Now, zero trust security and zero trust network access practice has proven to be very effective security measures for organizations around the globe to manage secure information access, right, and the workloads. And especially during the pandemic, right, the world has moved towards remote working frameworks, right, hybrid models, and along with bring BYOD allowance policies, right. They are expanding, but this is also leading to or growing or increasing the risks of cyber attacks, right. Now, so that makes the zero trust network access paramount importance today. So that's the focus of today's conversation. So let's start by focusing the big why first. So John, this one is going to be to you. You coined the term zero trust, right? And that's fantastic. And I'm glad that we're talking on this. So I want you to share with the audience the history, why you came up with this term, and what has driven it. And then I can follow up with Jason on that. Over to you, John.
Yeah, so when I was doing primary research on the problems of cybersecurity, and when I got to Forrester Research in 2008, there was sort of a moment of epiphany that there was this thing called the trust model that was very broken. In firewalls even today, and this is when I was installing firewalls, I hated this. You had to assign a trust level, and to me, the idea of assigning a trust level to an interface to determine policy just was not only counterintuitive, it was demonstrably wrong. And so I started doing research on this and came out with the first paper called No More Chewy Centers about zero trust in 2010. So I created not just coined the term zero trust, but created the entire concept of zero trust, which is about protecting things. So zero trust says that we have to eliminate the trust model. You said don't trust by default. No, don't trust ever, right? So we eliminate the concept of trust because we don't need it in IT. We don't need it in cybersecurity. And trust is a vulnerability that is exploited by malicious actors. So what we're doing is we're focusing on what we need to protect and breaking the problem down into small areas called protect surfaces, and not having any kind of trust at all in the system, and then explicitly choosing how we should allow or deny traffic to any particular resource, so we can do this in a secure manner. And what it did is zero trust is functionally a cybersecurity strategy, and really the only cybersecurity strategy in the world that can be implemented in multiple different ways with multiple different technologies, depending upon what you're trying to protect. And the goal of zero trust is to stop data breaches and other highly damaging successful cybersecurity attacks, right? So when we talk about cybersecurity attacks, anybody can attack anybody else at any given time because they're proximate and they have the capability. What we want to do is make sure those attacks aren't successful. So we're not, we'll never eliminate cybersecurity attacks, but we can make sure that they're not successful. And that's what zero trust is all about. It focuses on this fundamental flaw that we have called the trust model. So we never use the word trust in zero trust as anything other than a really bad thing. It's a 4-letter word. And now we have evolved into zero trust network access, which I would define as a way of providing remote access using zero trust principles and applying zero trust policy constructs to the remote access. So that in a nutshell is kind of how I view it. I call that authentic zero trust because it is devoid of vendor spin. What we see is a lot of the zero trust narrative came about when vendors said, oh, our product only does X, our product only does identity, so zero trust has to equal identity. And none of those things are true. So zero trust is a strategy, it's not a product, and it consumes identity. It isn't equal to identity systems.
Yeah, that's a interesting one that you shared. But I'm sure, you know, when you came up with this, John, it might not have been easy for you to move people from one mindset to another. For me, it's also mindset, right? We're talking about a mindset change. So what were some of those challenges that you faced from the mindset standpoint?
Yeah, changing the culture is really hard, and I can't tell you how many people said pretty mean things to me. But you know, I had some people who got it early on, and so there was always a group of people encouraging me to keep going, and I knew that it was the right way to do things because I'd been a practitioner. I've been a QSA, so a lot of what I learned being a QSA about protecting a single binary data string, figure out what you need to protect. That is inherent in zero trust. And so when you have a group of people who are very encouraging and helping you, and even the people I work for today, I met them early on in the journey, and they started building these zero trust environments, and they could demonstrably prove that it worked. So you have advocates, and those people are more important to you when you're coming up with a new idea than the naysayers, because a lot of people want to say it's never going to work, not because they have any idea that it's never going to work, but because they don't want to do anything differently. The thing I was always fighting was, that's not the way we've always done it. And I would always say, yeah, the way we've always done it hasn't worked. So, you know, whatever, right? And so you trying to get people from doing nothing to doing something is a huge task. And I've been at it, well, actually since 2008. I gave the first speech on zero trust in 2008 and spent 2 years doing research on it. So it wasn't like, oh, suddenly John wrote this paper. John spent a long time talking to people all over the world and doing primary research around this before publishing the paper. So there was a significant amount of effort that went into it early on.
Okay, no, thanks, John. And I'm glad that you found some advocates during that time. And I think, you know, the like-minded people is what is driving the change, right? And we're making things secure. Today we have 150 people. They are also thinking in the similar lines. Jason, you and I were chatting about zero trust security, and you know, what's your take on this, and how do you see this?
So, I mean, John did a fantastic job, obviously, explaining this since he created the term and the concept. And I think, you know, a lot of us in the industry are metaphorically standing on his shoulders to carry this forward.
I'm an old guy,
100%.
so I'm glad it's only metaphorically.
You're a strong man. Clearly, yeah, zero trust definitely is a security philosophy and approach, and it is a mindset shift. And I think it's John and I had a couple of conversations about, you know, trust and the need to not only avoid the term but avoid the concept and the usage. And it's really around, you know, there's certain things that I'll avoid the word trust here. We can use to prove, right? We all believe in math, and we can use math, aka cryptography, to prove that someone has the right certificate, et cetera. And that's the foundation that we build on this to establish not trust. I don't trust you, but it's proven to me that you have the secrets, right? The other half of the certificate that magic
Confidence is a good word for people.
Confidence is a good word, exactly. Confidence in math, and that's kind of the foundation that we use to then let you build in your zero trust model policies that essentially take into consideration these facts and attributes of the user and their device and things that come from the identity system. So a combination of factors that come from sources that are perhaps a little bit dubious, like, hey, I'm reporting from my device that I'm running antivirus. And of course, you don't know that I'm really running antivirus. I'm just telling you that I'm running antivirus. But there are some objective systems like a security system in your environment that does an endpoint scan or monitoring of network activity. So all those things are factors that go into the policy model that then let the zero trust policy decision point make decisions about what can access what. And I think John's frustration with firewalls is indicative of the challenges that we have with network teams who have this really impoverished language. It's not even a policy model. It's allow and block for IP addresses and subnets. And what they're trying to model in there, what you have to model is not should this source IP address get access to that target IP address, but does, Sally Jones, this human being who has a role in our company on this device, should she get access to this workload or data over here? And that's a really interesting but complicated question. And it's impossible to answer that in a network protocol that says, allow or block from an IP address. And that's the whole philosophy of zero trust, is elevating your ability to make these policy decisions with now you have a very diverse set of policy enforcement points that can operate. Yeah, they have the ability to enforce stuff at the network layer, but they're really enforcing this higher level policy. And that's part of the mind shift is zero trust really needs to encompass all these different dimensions. And that's why it's hard.
Yeah, and Jason, when you think about this, right, we have this, what we used to call the 5-tuple model, source, destination IP, protocol, all that kind of stuff. And we went beyond it, right, in starting in the early 2000s and through until recently. And now we're seeing people redo it, go back to that old model because of clouds, right? So I was just having this conversation last night with a company in Singapore where they've taken the old school paradigms and they're saying, well, that's good enough in a cloud because that's all that the Linux IP tables firewall can do: source, destination, port, and protocol. And so it's like we're reliving the past, and we have to move well beyond that. And when you talked about policy, you're exactly right, Jason. Ultimately, zero trust is instantiated as a layer 7 policy against traffic, right? So source, destination IP, port and protocol, not enough. Every attacker knows how to bypass those types of controls. It's trivial for them. You may say, well, it's hard for me to get through. Well, great. Yeah, I also can't, break into the safe at my bank, but that doesn't mean I want the bank to build safes that only I can't break into, right? And so when we talk about policy, I've created a policy construct called the Kipling method. And we've talked about this before, Jason, right? So we have the idea of who, what, when, where, why, and how. Rudyard Kipling gave us this idea in a poem in 1902. So we can take these very difficult sort of computer science ideas and put them in a language that real human beings can understand. Who should have access to a resource that's located in a particular place, where statement, via what application? Why is that something that should happen? Because it's, sensitive information, it's classified, it has these compliance mandates, whatever those things are. And then how should we allow that to happen? What kind of controls should we place on it? If it's uploading files, we should send those files to a sandbox, for example, to explode it and look at that. So understanding that Kipling method, who, what, when, where, why, and how, and then applying that to traffic and usage gives us those higher level ideas that we're going to need if we're going to move forward in building a secure future, because we can't do it just with what is native, in a Linux kernel, an ACL on a router, a layer 3 firewall. None of those things are strong enough to defeat the adversaries that exist today.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of that model is it's expressed in language that is actually meaningful to the very people in the organization that really know the right answer, and that the security team should be partnering with, which are the data custodians and the owners, the application owners. So I work in security. There's no way that I can make a decision about, should Sally Jones have access to this financial data? I have no idea. Who knows? Well, Sally's boss knows, the application owner knows, and they're precisely the people that should be partnered with to be able to actually to help define and design this policy.
Yeah, and you know, in Zero Trust, I originally defined four concepts, to design concepts, I call them. And the first one is focus on the business outcomes. And you just mentioned that, right? Because we don't interact with the business to ask those questions, and we never have. I mean, I've been around for a long, long time, sadly, and or I guess not sadly because I'm still alive, but still, I've seen all these things, right? And you know that no one ever asked the business these questions. Who should have access to this application? They just gave everybody access to everything because that was easy. And as a pen tester, that's what I always saw. If I got access to your environment, I got access to everything on the environment. And that's true in things that are supposed to be the highest security environments in the world, say the networks that Snowden and Manning stole data from. Those two names, I call them the Beyonce and Madonna of cybersecurity. They're so famous, right? And they were trusted users on trusted devices. They had the right antivirus, the right patch level. They had powerful identity systems and really strong multi-factor authentication. But nobody looked at their packets post authentication because they're trusted. So once you use this word trust, then you don't do important things to the packet that you should because you think of it as a human being. And it's not a human being. No person has ever been on a network. We anthropomorphize these concepts. We say Jason is on the network and Amol is on the network and John is on the network, and none of us are on the network, right? We're sitting in our homes or wherever we are, and we have not been shrunken into subatomic particles where we've been transferred over the public internet to the Citrix GoToWebinar server. It's never happened to any human being ever, right? Maybe in the movies, Tron Lawnmower Man, you get on the network, but even in the Matrix, you got to plug in. So people are not packets, and we need to, you know, I hate this idea that we have human entities and non-human entities. No, there are no human entities. There are packets that are asserted to apply to a person, Jason, or packets that are asserted to apply to a device, but there's no people on any network ever.
I like, John, how you put it, right? So there are no people. It's always about the packets. So that's a good one. And obviously, we cannot go to the subatomic level. But so we have this audience today, which is mix of industry professionals. Some are experts, and there are also students and budding professionals here, right? So maybe again, very good comprehensive answers from both of you. I really like those. But Jason, what I would request you, if you can share with our audience, the primary drivers for this shift in thought process, right? The drivers from perimeter to perimeter-less security. John covered certain aspects of it, but I want you to help audience understand the top drivers for this.
Okay, so we think there's really two main drivers to this, and one has been the amazing innovation and change that has happened in the way that applications are now accessed and delivered and built over the last 15 years. And clearly, not only have things shifted from traditional on-prem server-based applications to cloud-based applications, but they're also decomposed in ways that they haven't been before. So no longer do you have maybe a single application that's got business logic and presentation logic and data in one place. And they're not even separated just across 3 tiers, but now you have these serverless models, and they're much, much more complicated. They're also much higher velocity. If you look at the way that modern application development systems and programs work, is they really tend toward continuous integration, continuous deployment, or DevOps models, where you have the ability to deliver pieces of functions very, very quickly in a way that's automated. And that's sophisticated and it moves quickly, and it also drives the need to automate things. So as that has happened, and that could be deployed and done in an on-premises environment or a cloud environment, that's changed the velocity and the surface area, if you will, and made it difficult for security teams to keep up. And I think that's true in the DevOps model. It's also true for, as John mentioned, even if I'm taking a traditional full stack application and then moving up into a cloud environment, the networking model in the cloud environments are so different from on-prem that security teams or networking teams often say, all right, I'm going to fall back on this really basic allow block IP tables types of functionality. And they end up just putting a metaphorical wide area network cable between their enterprise and the cloud environment. So you end up with these very broad enterprise networks that now embrace very different types of technologies. And it's hard for security to keep up. You also have, of course, business owners using SaaS-based applications or platform as a service applications in ways that are outside the norm inside the enterprise. So that's brought tremendous benefit, business benefit and innovation toward the business and toward practitioners in whatever domain they're in, right? Research or manufacturing. But it's made it really hard and a lot more complicated for security and networking teams to keep up. So that's kind of one piece. And the second piece, of course, is the shift toward bring your own device in the last 2 years working from home, where now you have users who are literally anywhere in the planet who need to access any resource, both internal to a traditional network or in a cloud-based network. So that's amplified the complexity here and it made it important to have, I think, made it clearer to security teams that they really needed a unified model for providing access to users no matter where they are, to resources no matter where they are, and to get away from the traditional silos of, oh, I've got a remote access solution, it's a VPN, and I've got an on-prem access solution called a network access control, and they're completely different worlds with completely different languages and paradigms. And yeah, the person has to remember to turn on their VPN. Oh, the VPN doesn't work in the office, they use something else. And those gaps are result in the worst practices, some of the things that John mentioned, which is, oh, you're in the office network, you get access to everything because I trust you. And that's just letting the adversaries have full reign once they get a toehold on someone's device.
So thanks, Jason. Yes, so obviously modern and enterprise environments are too complex today than the earlier traditional days. That's this driving this change, especially with cloud-based services and so many connected pieces. And second, I think you mentioned about the remote and mobile environments, how they are getting into this, right, making that complex. John, you want to add anything on top of what Jason and I spoke?
Well, you know, when we look at, you know, why language is important and it fuels how people do things, Jason mentioned serverless computing, and I think almost nobody that I talk to knows what that is beyond a buzzword. I had somebody talk to me the other day explaining to me that there were no networks in clouds. Clouds didn't use networks, and they didn't even have to use servers. And I said, really? And this person said, haven't you heard about serverless computing? And I said, yeah, I kind of have. Yeah, they don't have servers anymore. I said, where did they store the data, do you think? And this person said, in DNA. And this was a high-level executive in IT. So there's consequences to coming up with this language that we need to be aware of. And we throw it around like candy. And it then diminishes our ability to solve things. So for example, we have the hashtag kill the VPN, which I despise, right? Because a VPN is just an encrypted tunnel, and it doesn't matter what the protocol is. I see a lot of SSL or TLS types of VPNs that don't have any policy. So if we talk about zero trust network access, it is a VPN no matter what the encryption protocol that has this higher level policy that I've already mentioned that you can define in a Kipley method manner. And that's what we have to understand, that it's not just the, it makes it sound like the technology is bad, but there's only two ways to send traffic across the public internet, either in clear text or via some encrypted channel. And so if it's encrypted, it's a VPN. We just want better VPNs that have policy there. And Jason is exactly right. This is what I fought at in my career early on, which is VPNs that just extended the network and you didn't terminate it and put policy in place. Back in the old days, you would have the VPN concentrator, we used to call it, that was parallel to the firewall, and we didn't even put basic layer 3 controls on that. We just let everybody go down that. And so you would see, source code being stolen from big companies where the attacker just rode the VPN of a valid user into the source code repository and then took it back out because nobody was inspecting that traffic. It's the inspection and the policy that makes it special, that makes it zero trusty. And so that's, the protocol doesn't matter, right? I've been doing SSL VPN since the Neo-Terrace days back then, if you remember that, so SSL/TLS, and I think those things are just synonymous now, even though there's differences, is just a way of dealing with the transport. But you can have bad policy inside of a TLS tunnel as easily as inside of an IPsec tunnel. So we have to understand that, again, this is about policy. It's abstracted from the technology. Think about what you're protecting, how any particular asserted identity has access to the resource and what they're going to be able to do with that once they get that access. That's the key.
Yeah, well said, John. So, John, obviously, there are things that keep on evolving and changing. With the advent of Internet of Things, right, or the devices, the sheer amount of connections have grown and the devices have grown. Now, I want you to answer this one more from the architecture of ZTNA and how do you handle, how do we handle the Internet of Things device? And those could be at a different levels, right? There are simpler devices with less complexities but easy to hack, or there could be one with good horsepowers with them. So help us understand how do we address that?
Yeah, I mean, the Internet of Things. If you Google my name, Dr. Seuss, and Internet of Things, you will see the poem that I wrote a number of years ago about this, in the voice of Dr. Seuss. But the reality is we're worried about the thing and not what the thing does. Now, the thing whether it's thing one or thing two, to use a Dr. Seuss kind of analogy, still rides a network, right? And typically that's a traditional TCP/IP network. That's the thing that has made the Earth flat. And so I just did an Internet of Things with Rockwell International, and the CTO there was decrying the fact that we think of OT and IT and IoT as different stuff, and they're not. They're all running on the same network, and we can apply the same policies to it. So I've been doing this kind of work for a long time, and you're in the medical device space. How do I secure a wireless morphine infusion pump? Well, I don't secure it natively because the manufacturer doesn't give me much ability to secure it natively. So I have to secure it based upon how the traffic flows work. So Zero Trust also has a 5-step deployment model that if you follow that, you will always be successful. And it looks like this. First is define the protect surface. What do I need to protect? So in this case, it's the morphine infusion pump, because if I'm writing the Godfather part X, right, I don't send somebody in to kill the bad guy who's in the hospital like in the first Godfather. I just hire a hacker to hack the morphine infusion pump and OD him on morphine, right? That'll get him. And so I need to understand what I need to protect, the morphine infusion pump. Then I need to understand and map the transaction flows. How does it work together as a system? Because that will show me where the controls are. So it will show me that there's probably some computer that controls the settings on the morphine infusion pump. And so I need some sort of, as Jason would talk about it, some sort of policy enforcement point there, right? I talk about those as segmentation gateways. They're a gateway that segments that out and applies policies to it layer 2 through 7. And so that's second step. I've mapped the transaction flow. Then the third step is I put the control in place. The fourth step is I write the policy, this Kipling method layer 4 policy. So only this one computer or this one server gets access to the morphine infusion pump. And there's a set of known users who can access that. And now I write the policy very granular so that somebody just on the Wi-Fi network can't go in and make changes to it. And then the fifth step is I monitor and maintain. I take all that telemetry, that data being generated by the control system, and I bring it in and create a feedback loop. And then Zero Trust becomes anti-fragile at that point. If you're not familiar with anti-fragility from Taleb, you should read his book, Anti-Fragile. The idea that we can put a system under load and it will get stronger and stronger. So reading that book gave me the vocabulary to talk about what was in the back of my mind of where I wanted cybersecurity to go, and I wanted to make it anti-fragile. And so if you follow those 5 steps, protect surface transaction flows, controls and architecture, policy, monitor and maintain, you will always be successful. It's very simple. And so it's a mathematical formula. Solve for X, X being the protect surface. So don't worry about whether it's an Internet of Things thing. Worry about it's the morphine infusion pump, and I need to secure it because it sends morphine into the veins of my patients. That's why I do it, right? And so I need to secure that system and think of it as a system. And if you do those things, you will always be successful.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And there's when we think about IoT, we really think of them as kind of 2 broad classes of things. And one of them are the types of mechanisms that John mentioned, which are the morphine infusion pumps or the IP cameras, these closed devices where you as an enterprise get them from the manufacturer and you say, okay, I can't change them. So I need to have some sort of upstream policy enforcement point and understand and be able to enforce what can that system access upstream and what or who can access it downstream, and to be able to enforce that. Then there's a second class of IoT devices where they are extensible. These might be, systems or components that are built on standard platforms like an Arduino, where the enterprise is writing and deploying software on them, and you can put arbitrary components on them. So you might have a Zero Trust client actually running on the device. In that case, it really looks and feels just like a regular server or a user device, maybe with some limited capacity. In both those worlds, you do have to understand the system. You have to understand the network and think about even one additional angle, which is, okay, let's say I have an environmental sensor deployed on a bunch of buildings in my city. Well, number one, someone could climb up on the roof of the building and unplug the Ethernet cable that it's using and plug in their own device. Okay, I have to protect against that. Or they could probably get shell on that device because these things are not terribly secure. And then how do I make sure that that's controlled? That's another attack vector. If you take all those things together, then think about from a Zero Trust model, okay, what does my network topology look like? Where are the enforcement points and how can I protect that? And John's right, is you have to look at it from a systems perspective, not just, am I preventing traffic to or from this device, but what's the admin console for the system that controls all the morphine pumps in the hospital? How is that protected? Because that would be a pretty ripe attack surface.
No, yeah, I think thanks, Jason, and thanks, John. I like John took an example of morphine pump, right? And let me, also add to it, right? So earlier, in the FDA's medical guidance used to be primarily focused in terms of patient safety, right? And patient safety is important, but at the same time, healthcare IT are more concerned about securing healthcare organizations, right, and protecting them from these breaches, what we talked about. So obviously now the FDA has also released pre-market and recently released post-market management of this cyber security of medical devices. And again, some of the 5 steps that John mentioned, those are also become an integral part of defining the practices when we are building this, medical devices, especially where the remote patient management is in picture. But yeah, I think good advancements are happening. But follow up on that, Jason. So, where do you see industry is today? I mean, a lot of efforts are going on in ensuring security of the zero trust of their setups and infrastructure. But where do you see in general? What's your take on where do we see the industries today?
And that's, that may seem naive because we have never seen as many successful attacks and breaches as ever. But the reason I'm optimistic is that at least there's much more awareness and activity around the zero trust approach. Everything from actions and activities that are going on in various industry organizations and consortiums, and you've got, from the U.S. federal government, from the President of the United States issuing an executive order around zero trust. There's a lot of activity and actual initiatives and efforts. So these are funded initiatives, both in private sector as well as in public sector, around advancing on the zero trust model. And I think there's definitely a lot more recognition of this is a demonstrably better way to do it. And the momentum that we're seeing in organizations to go step by step down their zero trust journey. And it is a journey and it is complicated. And there are definitely barriers, whether they're technical barriers or cultural barriers, some of the things that we talked about earlier. But I am optimistic and hopeful. The risk, of course, is that everything is now labeled zero trust because that's where all the money is being spent. So, our joke is that at RSA coming up in February, you're going to be able to walk down to the commissary and buy a zero trust ham sandwich. So I think it's a bit of a burden on enterprises to make sense of this landscape and to be able to construct a coherent zero trust strategy and architecture and technology plan inside their organization. And I think that's really, I think the biggest challenge is looking at these really complicated enterprise environments and us as an industry making it easier for these organizations to take this journey to a much better place, but to be able to do it in a way that is suitable for the less sophisticated enterprises.
Yeah,
thanks. I like your optimism, but John, you didn't seem to agree somehow to what Jason was saying, or what's your
I
take on
agree with that. I'm hugely optimistic. I mean, I think we can win this war. I talk about one of my core presentations is win the cyber war with zero trust, right? I think it's winnable because we can control the things that people want to steal. And so it's not like a kinetic war where so much of it is outside of our control. We can control who has access to the resources that we own, right? One of the problems is we give too many people access to those resources for no reason. And we have a lot of traffic on our environment that's unknown, right? Which we don't do in like in your house. Jason, last night when you were, sitting around with all your buddies watching TV, if somebody walked in and that you didn't know and got beer out of the refrigerator and you said, "Hey, anybody know that dude?" And everyone goes, "No, we don't." And would you say, well, I guess they belong here because they have the ability to get beer out of the refrigerator. I better make up the guest room? No, you wouldn't do that. But we do that in our networks and our digital environments all day long. So we have to quit being afraid of doing preventative work, right? And stopping the bad stuff. And if there's the occasional false positive, which I see so few of them now, great. So what, right? We stopped a good thing. We've reset that. Here you go. Quit worrying about that. We let so much bad stuff into our environment because we're afraid that we're going to stop a good thing. That we have to get rid of that. There should be no concept of unknown traffic in our digital environments. In the same way, there's no concept of unknown traffic in our homes, right? There is no unknown traffic in your house unless maybe you're doing an open house to sell your house. That is the only time there would be unknown traffic, or you're holding a big party and you've just kind of invited the whole neighborhood, which has its own inherent dangers, but you've already hidden all the important stuff, right? In case some klepto comes in. So, think about it from those perspectives, and we have just a lot of bad practices. And then we have a set of bad incentives because, I'm an important person and you stopped my email for 10 seconds. I'm going to fire you, right? Quit blaming people for this kind of stuff. This is really challenging work. Dan Geer, one of our luminaries in the industry, says cybersecurity is the world's most challenging intellectually challenging profession. So these people who work for you, the cybersecurity people, they're the cream of the crop of IT and technology. Give them the respect they deserve and know that they're fighting a battle, right? Cybersecurity is an adversarial business. There are only two other adversarial businesses in the world. One is the military, one is law enforcement, and then there's cybersecurity. And so it's completely different than when you're dealing with competitors. You're now dealing with adversaries who are perhaps the most sophisticated adversarial systems the world has ever seen. So cut your people some slack. Yeah, they might stop some good stuff once in a while, but it's more important to stop the bad stuff and then occasionally have a false positive than to make sure you never have false positives but allow a lot of bad stuff in.
Good. I like that, John, and I'm glad that all three of us are on the optimistic side, and I like your empathetic part of it, right? Being on the side of people. So that's good. Let's talk about regulations. Are there any regulations? What's happening there? Regulations, standards. Are we supporting, or are there anything getting formulated? John, you want to talk about that? I gave a perspective from the FDA side, but anything from your side?
Well, I think we should talk about guidance, right? So there's really no standards in cybersecurity. Even NIST, while it has standards in the name, is a guidance organization for the US federal government. So, if you say, oh, there's a NIST standard for that, you're kind of misunderstanding NIST's role in this whole ecosystem. So NIST, CISA, DISA, the NSA, the DoD have all issued zero trust guidance. I, of course, have written extensively on all of this to provide guidance for people. There are best practices that I can tell you that will work. Very simple, the 9 things, the 4 design principles, the 5 steps. But I don't think there should be standards because when you have standards, you A, inhibit innovation, and B, you commoditize things and not understand the specifics of an environment. So I can't tell you how to build your zero trust environment at any given time until I know what you need to protect. So all the time I'm on calls and they want to talk about products. Where do I put this product or this thing or that thing? And I don't know, what are you trying to protect? And they go, oh, wow, we haven't thought about that. So the one thing I would say to people here, as we move towards the Q&A section, is understand what you need to protect. Until you know the answer to that, you will fail. It doesn't matter what technology you use. And there's great technologies out there, but this is not about technology. This is about protection.
Yeah, good. I think that puts that takes me to the next question. So we talked about current state, right? On this side, now amazing developments are happening, right? In terms of technologies, in terms of systems, and environments are changing. Especially the pandemic has accelerated many things in the world in terms of how do we interact and how the systems work together. So what's the future? What's next? So what's happening? John, you want to start, and then Jason, you want to add from here?
I want to hear from Jason first. I want to hear what's happening from
Jason.
his world, so
All right,
that
Jason,
I have that context.
I think that hopefully what will happen, first of all, is that we see a real shift towards zero trust as the dominant way of thinking around it, from a systems perspective, from an architectural perspective of how do you approach security. I think we're definitely at the early stages of that. And there's plenty of fish to fry and things to do for enterprises right now around answering some of the questions of what do I need to protect and how do I do it in a way that increases my organization's resiliency to attack and lets me really do this mindset shift to this overall security philosophy. There are still a lot of open areas around zero trust. And I agree with John's comment around some of the stuff is really hard to standardize, because what is standardization? It's around either interoperability or having a way of expressing things in a way that can be shared or used across resources. And the fundamental problem is that what zero trust ultimately does is enforce things down at a network packet level that are really sophisticated concepts of organizations and identities and access to resources. And we're really not at a state where you could say, all right, here's a network protocol that defines, the control plane that tells a zero trust policy decision point, lets it tell a policy enforcement point what should be allowed to happen. There's so many variables there in terms of the network architecture and the capabilities of policy enforcement point that's something that's pretty much impossible today. I do think that there are areas, especially around the edges, that we can and will be able to define things like how should a endpoint management system interface with a zero trust policy decision point? How should it tell it in some sort of standardized way? Here's what I know about this endpoint as you're authenticating them and making a decision about should Sally Jones get access to this data on this device. Likewise, an event model, hey, I'm a SIM and I notice something anomalous has happened on this device. What's the event model? What way in some interoperable format can I tell the policy decision point, the zero trust system, you need to do something because Sally's device is exhibiting weird behavior? So I think those areas of how we can start to see data and event exchange between systems like DLP systems and endpoint systems and 25 other areas is the future. But that's because that doesn't exist, it shouldn't in any way impede organizations to get started today on just your core zero trust. Think about the model, think about the architecture, and for goodness sake, let's start locking down the entry points to our networks, enforcing the principle of least privilege, putting MFA in, and dialing up our capabilities there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, the technology is going to change, and just because I've always thought that somebody once said to me, never let perfection get in the way of greatness. And so you can do some amazing things today. Now, when you think about interoperability, standards were created, as you mentioned, for interoperability primarily, and we now solve interoperability through APIs. That was the huge technological leap that started to allow all kinds of things to interoperate without a lot of programmatic changes to systems. So back in the old days, as you and I both can remember, when you needed System A to talk to System B, developers from System A and System B both had to write code to make that happen. Well, now there's an API, and you just figure out how that API works, and then you go, bada bing, bada boom, there you go. So we've solved a lot of those kinds of interoperability problems. Now we need to have different ways to think about resources. We need new advancements in, say, data classification. We need to, understand how we can incentivize people in the proper way, which is what the president's executive order did. So there's a lot of incentivization that still needs to happen. And then we need to eliminate the fear of trying something new. And so I'm always, I'm involved in Newton's law of a body in motion tends to stay in motion, and a body at rest tends to stay at rest. And most digital environments are bodies at rest. They hate change because it's working. It doesn't matter whether it's secure or not, but if it's working, that's the important thing. But I'm trying to be that agent of motion to get them moving a little bit. You don't have to do big things. You don't have to do hard things. Just do something. So where do you start? Somewhere, right? It doesn't really matter. And that's why I've created a learning curve. Start small, do this incrementally, do it iteratively, then it'll be non-disruptive and you don't have to worry about breaking stuff. So I think a lot of those things that are the inhibitors have been solved. We just need to get that information out. And I agree with you. What's going to happen, what needs to happen is people just need to do this.
All right, well said. And almost 50 minutes in our discussion, so we don't realize time flies. Let's move toward the last or the last but one section. So we have good audience here. I want one liner or one message if you want to give to the audience, right? And remember, the audience is mix of experiences. So Jason, what's your message?
My message is get started and embrace the complexity of your enterprise environment and understand that you will be able to step by step go down this zero trust journey.
John.
He stole mine.
Maybe he asked me first.
Yeah, I know. No, I mean, this is a lot less complex than you think it is. It's designed to be simple. It's designed to save money. It's designed to be a 21st century way of thinking about things. So look at it from that perspective. Don't look at it with your 20th century eyes. Put on your 21st century glasses and you will see, I can do this, right? And if you need help, you got a lot of people in the world like Jason and I. We want nothing more than to help you. And so that's why we do this. I'm doing a session here in like 10 minutes in Belgium. So I get, the Star Trek transporter actually works. That's what we've proven with coronavirus, right?
All right, and I'll just add mine. So when it comes to health, we always say prevention is better than cure. And the message is, make the mindset change and be the change agent to the audience. Be the change agent to make organizations and environments more secure. So with that, let's come to conclusion. So today, it was a great interaction, guys. So thank you for all your responses, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So we talked about what is zero trust network access architecture, the need, the drivers for the shift, the architecture, and briefly, John, you touched upon, and the practices, the changing environments. We talked about the current state. We talked about the industry adoption, and all of us are optimistic towards driving this change, and the supporting standards, regulation, how they are evolving. We talked about the future state, and we talked about the message. So with that, I would hand it over to the Richa and team to take it forward for the Q&A. Richa and Shilpa, over to you. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Amol. Thank you so much to all the panelists for such an insightful and informative session. I'm sure audiences have really enjoyed it, the kind of questions we've gotten. And it was really an interesting webinar. I hope it was worth your time. So before we begin with the Q&A, let us know if you're interested to learn more about our programs. Please take part in the poll, and which will be conducted now, and our concerned person will get in touch with you regarding your interest. So moving on to the first question. The first question is by Samuel. Does enforcing zero trust and checks on now untrusted packets not increase the need for higher resource capabilities, leading to increased TCOs?
Well, I mean, a lot of that has been solved by Moore's law, right? So as computers have gotten faster and better and more powerful, they've also decreased in cost. So I don't see that there's an increased total cost of ownership. In fact, a lot of times, you're consolidating technology instead of having. I have one customer that has 22 hops to the internet because they have a firewall and an IPS and a web content filter and all these other things going on where that can be collapsed into a single device, reducing your capex. And then because you're only managing one device instead of 22, you've reduced your OPEX. So there's actually cost savings here that we should be well aware of as we move forward.
Thank you, John. Moving on to the second question. There is a lot of abuse of the zero trust in the field of different vendors. Everyone wants to map ZT to products that revolve around devices and users, and everyone forgets about data. The question isn't an enterprise if data is not controlled. Data flow is mapped and identified. Will ZT will be another failure like DLP?
I can jump in. I think that enterprise DLP is definitely an unsolved problem, and a lot of that has to do with classification. So I think that organizations definitely need to understand at the very high level the data and the resources or the workloads around that data, and be able to put in place who should have access to what type of model like we talked about. I think that there will hopefully be some developments in the future that will do a better job of a combination of enabling users or automated data classification. But assuming that that's still a few years out, you just need to look at the overall risk of the application, make sure there's some level of segregation of duties in terms of the application data, and control access to it based on the principles that we talked about. And follow best practices around data retention and encryption, because at some point, an attacker will get access to the raw data, and you need to make sure that that's protected as well.
And there's a lot of things that have to be in a zero trust environment that aren't data. I used to say the first step of zero trust was define your data. And what I realized is I need to bring other things into that. So, I've got a client, a hospital. His number one system he's worried about is the elevators, which are controlled digitally. Because if the elevators don't work, patients don't move. If patients don't move, patients die, right? I'd never thought about that before. And so I'm constantly learning and evolving, but, we can still secure data. And the idea that because DLP failed, zero trust is going to fail is just a little bit, out there, because it just is, right? I don't even know how to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think data is one attack surface, but it's not the only one, because there's availability and there's integrity, and those are clearly aspects of it. And there's user productivity as well. So I think there's many dimensions and ways that zero trust can and will and has been successful, even putting aside the challenges around DLP and data classification.
And I've written extensively on this at Forrester. So I call it defining your data, and I've come up with a new way to do data classification for the modern world based upon how you protect it. It's just no one wants to adopt that. They want the old way of secret, top secret, for your eyes only, and no one can, when I go in, what's the difference between that data and how would you protect it differently? Well, no, those analog models don't work in the computer world because computers don't have intuition. We relied on the intuition of the person reading that document to know how to classify it. We can't do that in the digital world. We need to come up with new ways. I've actually presented a concept, but the industry isn't ready for it, and maybe they will be someday.
Thank you, Jason and John. Moving on to the next question. It's by Gaurav. Achieving zero trust is often perceived as costly and complex. How zero trust can build upon existing architecture? Or are there any challenges in attack surface identification with zero trust architecture?
You want to take that, Jason, or do you want me to?
Sure. Yeah, no, for sure. I think that one of the core principles of zero trust is enforcing the principle of least privilege all the way down to the network layer. So if you do it right, an unauthorized attacker external to the enterprise should see nothing. No more VPN entry points or applications exposed directly. An attacker inside the enterprise should see almost nothing. The only thing they should be able to see is, let's say that I click on some malware or phishing link and I get malware on my device. I get access to 10 applications. That's the only thing the attacker should be able to see, which are, in my world, business applications. I don't have a need to do any administrative access to those 10 systems. And I certainly don't have any need to get network access to the other 3,000 systems on the network. That is, the soft white underbelly, so to speak, of many enterprises is that wide open network. So you're really dialing down the attack surface. Sure, I make a mistake, I get malware, and now those 10 applications are at risk. That's okay. That's a contained and constrained attack surface. And what the malware can't do is do network reconnaissance, move laterally, find default credentials, and the normal and all too often successful attack pathway. So zero trust, when done right, when starting with the principle of least privilege, gives you a very, very constrained network view for the attacker and significantly increases the resiliency of your organization.
Yeah, I'll just add to it, Jason, and I'll give you a perspective, Gaurav, from the healthcare side, right? Now, here we are not just talking about cost, but we're talking about patient safety. the healthcare IT organizations, right, have to protect not just the data but also the patient, right, from this attacks. So patient safety becomes paramount importance, and the cost associated with that, definitely organizations have to take care of those, because it's about human life and then their therapies and solutions. So that's a different ball game altogether.
Thank you, Jason, John, and Amol. Since we are short of time, I'll just take two more questions. The second last question is from Sanchit. How do you see SSO in terms of zero trust environment?
Well, zero trust consumes SSO, right? Because it consumes identity. SSO is part of identity. Pretty simple. I would say we use it all the time in policy creation.
Perfect. Moving on to the last question. It's from Adivale. He said, thanks for your time, Jason, Amol, and John. As a cybersecurity master students with ECCU, what is your advice considering cloud security architect and how I can make myself nerd?
Jason, you want to take?
Sure, I would say keep on learning and attending things like this, and don't be afraid to write. Post a blog, posting, establish presence on social media, and dive in.
Superb. Thank you. Thank you again to all the wonderful speakers for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared to the global audience. It was a pleasure to have you all with us, and we're really looking for more and more sessions with you. And thank you to all the attendees who have joined the webinar and took part in the Cyber Talk series and the poll which we conducted. And with this, we would like to conclude the webinar, and you all may can disconnect the line. Thank you so much,
Thank you very
Jason,
much.
John,
Bye.
and Amol for your
Good seeing you
time.
again, Jason.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.